So today I want to explain a little sacred geometry and how step 0 plays into Pisces and plays into God consciousness. It goes to sacred geometry, and sacred geometry has its own stories for creation as far as how geometry unfolded. And there's a lot of mysticism and magic in geometry. In fact, I think the sacred geometry is a big part of the Masons and the stonecutters and their mysticism and a lot of the angles and things that you see in Washington, D.C., our national capital, also sacred geometry in play. We know that some lines and things draw in currents and flow energy in certain directions. So the story goes something like this, that when Creator decided to create the 3D world, God thought in 3 directions into infinity. Thought X into infinity, Y into infinity, and Z into infinity. And to create a separateness, God drew a circle where they all intersected. And this was the first separation from God, because now you had a relativity of consciousness instead of an absolute. The relativity in the first relativity is in versus outside, versus the third, which is not or neither, right? Those are the third. So there's always 3 dimensions in every one of the steps, but at this point there's one circle, and this is what step 0 is. Our separation from Creator, our separation in the 3D world from other people's creations. Now this is, I think, the where the sun comes from in the sun symbol of astrology and natal horoscopes. You see this symbol to represent the sun, and to me this is very simply love with a boundary around it, right? That's basically what it is. So the sun, it represents, you see a lot of this mysticism of sacred geometry in clues to a lot of the glyphs and symbols that we use in our daily life. Now what happens, according to the story, is that God first separates like a cell. That's the first thing that happens. God separates like a cell, and just like everything, creates 2, and what you end up having are these 3 divisions of consciousness, all having 3 dimensions, right? And this is the slide I got to a little quickly. So you have God, you have the goddess, and you have in the center the divine child. So this represents how consciousness overlaps consciousness and creates new consciousness. And according to the book I'm reading, Conversations with God, God talks about that every 2 souls that are working together creatively create this divine child between them. And he says that the divine child is exactly halfway between their 2 bodies on earth. So if you're in New York and I'm in California and we're creating a creative project together, our divine child is somewhere in Missouri. Which might explain a lot going on in Missouri. Just saying. But so these are the 3 spheres: God, divine child, and goddess. Now it also is our classic Roman Catholic Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. All right. So the Holy Ghost is in the center there. And that's what this represents too, the 3 dimensions of consciousness, which is always Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost, or God, Goddess, and the divine child. All right. Now this area is actually called the Vesica Pisces. They call this area where the 2 consciousness overlap the Vesica Pisces. And interestingly enough, that is exactly where the Pisces symbol comes from. See that? Right there on top. So Pisces, the fish, comes from the Vesica Pisces, which comes from the sacred geometry in the house that Jack built, right? This is known as the Jesus fish. So the Jesus fish is actually the Vesica Pisces, known as the fish. And you see this symbol in all sacred geometry everywhere. This is, of course, the flower of life, which is a very sacred symbol that continues with that pattern of God dividing like cells into circles and moving around the circles, and you create these shapes. The Vesica Pisces is created over and over and over again in the sacred geometry diagram. So you see it over and over. And it represents, again, how consciousness creates the collective consciousness, in my opinion. I think, like, my life might be one sphere, and it swings into my mom, and hers swings into someone else's. And there are Vesica Pisces between all of us, constantly creating the potential of a child, if it's a man-woman falling in love, or even the potential of creation, if it's 2 people working on a creative project. Now, you might be familiar with the Tree of Life. The Tree of Life is also based on the sacred geometry. It is also surrounded by and plugs into the Flower of Life. and it is the sacred Kabbalah or Kabbalah. I'm not quite sure what the proper is because I haven't actually studied under a rabbi, but I believe it is. I say Kabbalah, you say Kabbalah, but whatever it is, it's sacred and it ties into all this consciousness. And the tree of life, from what I understand, explains how human consciousness diagrams up and down and how it flows together. So definitely one of my reading topics the next time I get a break. But I'm a Taurus, so will that ever happen? Well, let's hope it does.